Welcome to Gen Z Hoops, the Gen Z basketball, coaching, and sports business show. On this podcast, you'll learn from professional players, coaches, and executives from all over the world and see the court in a brand new way. And now, joining you courtside, your Gen Z host, John Hartofilis.
Hey, Matt, what's going on?
John, happy to be here. How you doing?
I'm doing great. I'm super excited to have you on. I mean, we obviously both graduated from Xavier High School. You were always one of those alumni that always get name dropped when it came to the sports world. Whenever I would talk about wanting to go into the sports industry, and you were always kind of like that gold standard, like, oh, you know, Matt Fortuna just graduated. He's one of those guys. So awesome having you on.
Well, that's quite an introduction. I'll try to live up to it, but I appreciate the rollout for me. It's good to be here.
Just to kind of get us started, taking you all the way back to those days at Xavier, how some of those experiences and you being a manager at Xavier kind of prepared you for this career you've built for yourself in the sports industry?
Yeah, no problem. I mean, like every red-blooded American male, I thought I was going to grow up and be, you know, a professional athlete, right? And growing up in Manhattan, basketball was a sport of choice. I mean, we had a small, well, I wouldn't say small, we had a terrace in our apartment growing up. And my brother, Danny, who I'm sure you know, and who played basketball at Xavier, we would just play sun up to sundown outside on our porch. And we really had that advantage, I think, over everyone else, and parks everywhere. And we were just always playing. And long story short, I had some medical issues that would not allow me to play at Xavier. And that as a teenager, having that taken away from you, I'm probably a little more sympathetic than others right now when I see some athletes out there, particularly at the college level, who have to give something up because of a testing issue with the heart or something like that. And mentally, that messed with me a lot at that time. And not to sound too cliche, but it ended up becoming the greatest thing that ever happened to me, because I am 5'10" right now, and I was 5'10" as an 8th grader. So my dreams of growing into the next Shaq quickly went from being the starting center to the starting manager or the starting sports journalist, because I was able to deal with those emotions, so to speak. Coach Dufell was the JV coach at the time. We had a really good JV team my sophomore year, and he invited me on to be student manager, and I managed that year, and I managed my senior year when my brother was a junior on the varsity team, which was also, I don't want to go so far as say it's one of the greatest teams in Xavier history, because we didn't close the deal and finish it all and win it all. But it was a really good team. I mean, we ended up losing in the semis, but, you know, Cardinal Hayes won it all that year. And that was a team we had beaten on the road that year. So certainly we were right in that mix for that. I believe at the time it was called the Class A Division Championship. I'm not sure what they call it now, but those experiences, you know, just being around an athletic program, taking stats down, fetching errands for Coach McGrain if he needed his dry cleaning. You know, it's stuff you kind of laugh at and hang your head at the time, because you're kind of an errand boy, but you don't realize, like, that's real life, and you're getting to experience real life, you know, at a high school level, whereas most people don't get to experience that until they're in college or until they're at the professional level. And so, so much of what I learned there, and so much of the structural manners in which Coach McGrain, I don't know if he's loosened up at all now, all these years later, but he was a tough guy. He was really tough. And being a manager, when you're at the scorer's table and you're able to kind of eavesdrop on other teams' huddles and stuff, I'm like, no, like, he is a different breed. Like, he is driving you in everything you do, whether you're a manager, whether you're a backup point guard, whatever. He is pushing you and on you relentlessly. So I learned a lot, because I think if you can, I don't want to say you can survive, but if you can learn how to handle demands and needs at a high level in whatever you're doing in life, that makes everything easier for you when you go to college and you're, you know, in my case, work at the student newspaper or freelancing high school sports stories, and you got to do things on deadline, and you know, people are yelling at you for stuff. You're just able to process everything a whole lot better. And then the connections, I mean, I don't need to explain to you how special a place Xavier is, and how many great people came through there. And, you know, we're a part of that basketball program. My senior year, our freshman assistant coach was a guy by the name of Kobe Altman. He would drive me to Brooklyn to scout games with him. And I will still hold that over my friends. Anytime I have a basketball debate with them, I say, you know what? I scouted games with a guy who was LeBron James's boss one day. With the Cleveland Cavaliers as general manager. So don't question my hoops knowledge, but I think there's great lessons in there, right? Like, you got to lead from the seat you're in, and you got to utilize all the connections that you have at your disposal. And I think Xavier is one of the best places you could possibly do that.
Definitely. And it's so much to unpack right there, because of course, I mean, when it comes to accountability, no institution, I think, is better than doing that at Xavier. And when you're 14, 15, 16 years old, I mean, I feel like I was held at a higher standard there, even than now that I'm in college. which is
I
crazy.
felt the
to think
exact
about.
same way. It's funny you say that. I had the exact same feelings. Even some of the teachers at Xavier who were really on my case my senior year. We all have senioritis, right? Especially in high school when you get that first college acceptance letter. And there were guys who were grinding me there, and I was just like, I'm done here already. Like, what are you doing? And I remember coming back, I think for the Turkey Bowl for the pep rally my freshman year at Penn State in college, coming back to Xavier, and I see Mr. Lavigny, and I just want to go up to him and be like, I now get it, man. Like, you ran a college class at a high school level, and every single class I have right now is just like what you were trying to get us to understand. And so as much as I didn't like it at the time, I'm so much better off for it.
So all that stuff is mind blowing for sure. Going over your stuff at Penn State, I did hear from Coach McGrain about the article you wrote in the Penn State newspaper that ended up getting picked up by the New York Times. That's definitely something that, of course, I would imagine was monumental for you and helped jumpstart everything. Can you kind of give us the backstory on that and how that ended up happening? Because that's awesome.
Yeah, thank you. Much like Xavier, I mean, Penn State's a really big school with a really big network. And I think if you're going to whatever field you're choosing, and if you end up at a place like that, you need to utilize all the resources at your disposal. And you have, if not the biggest, one of the biggest alumni associations in the country. They have a great college of communications, which is where I was enrolled in there, and a great student newspaper where I wrote there for 4 years. And I much like Xavier, I was very lucky to have so many great mentors in my corner. In fact, here's a Xavier story for you. My college advisor at Penn State was a man by the name of Malcolm Moran. He now works in Indianapolis. He was a longtime reporter for the New York Times, USA Today, Newsday. He's from Bayside, Queens. His father's a graduate of Xavier High School. So we hit it off immediately. And to have a man with that experience and with the same local connections that I did in central Pennsylvania, middle of nowhere, God bless him. But I mean, it's a very remote place on the map. It could not be more different from Manhattan if you tried to draw it up. To have someone like that in my corner through those connections, it was great. To answer your question with New York Times, there was a student from New Jersey a couple of years ahead of me named Mark Vieira, who's now, I believe, in law. He had written a couple stories on a freelance basis for the New York Times when I was freshman or sophomore. He was a couple of years ahead of me, and getting to see that was possible at that age. I mean, that was something that wasn't even on my radar. So to have someone under the same roof as me at the school paper doing that just showed me, the possibilities here are really endless. And I was fortunate enough that as I got to my junior year, Ira Miller, another Penn State alum who's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame, he was a longtime writer out in San Francisco covering the 49ers during the heydays of Montana and Rice. He knows everyone, and he was always very influential and very hands-on in a mentoring role to whoever was at the school paper at that time. And, I got to know him a little bit, and out of the blue, he suggested, hey, you're from New York. Next time you're home on break, why don't you go to the Times office and talk to Mike Abrams? He's a Penn State grad. He loves to help Penn Staters. What's the worst that can happen there, right? I never in a million years thought it would have netted me a couple paid articles in the world's biggest publication as a college student. But sure enough, I was lucky enough where that ended up being the case. I think part of that too, for everything I said about how different central Pennsylvania is to Manhattan, I use that to my advantage. I would cover games for outlets that didn't want to pay the money to send their writers on a plane, train, and automobile for a one-night stand in State College, Pennsylvania, because it would cost a lot less money to just pay a student there to do the work. And for me, I would have done it for free at that point. I was just trying to get my name out there. So being around a Big Ten campus and being around a remote Big Ten campus where you had the opportunities to cover so many big events and meet so many different people, was just a tremendous resource and something was probably the biggest reason I am where I am today.
Another article that you wrote that just really stuck out to me was the recent one about Dr. Fauci. And it was really funny with the Xavier and Regis connection there. How much fun was it writing that article, and what kind of went into it?
That was, I hate to say so much fun because it was about a serious subject in the middle of a pandemic, but like personally rewarding. That one was really special for me. And to see the response, I mean, that story performed very well on our website. That was rewarding as well, because it reminds you that you don't have to just write about the Lakers or Notre Dame or the big brands to get people's attention. You can write about a guy's commute to school, be that from Staten Island, Brooklyn, from wherever, the way Tony Fauci did when he was a student at Regis. I came across the idea probably the same way you did. I saw those pictures floating around right at the beginning of the pandemic of Dr. Fauci. It is Regis uniform. And, in addition to going to Xavier, which is Regis's rival, I grew up on 84th and 3rd and went to St. Ignatius Middle School directly across the street from Regis. So that is my neighborhood. Like to see that arguably the most important person in America right now came from that building that I passed every single day and played in the same, basketball conference that I was a part of as a student. That was really cool. I didn't think I'd get a chance to talk to him, and I didn't. But I emailed the communication staff at Regis, and here's another funny, the world is small story. The communications director, who I did not know, says, "So, Matt Fortuna, I'm a Notre Dame graduate. I listen to your Notre Dame podcast. What do you need? How can I help you?" And so that was like, wow, the cards are aligning for me here. This is working out perfectly. And what happened was the Wall Street Journal had actually, this may be a little too inside baseball for you, but the Wall Street Journal was writing a very similar story and had already contacted Regis about it. And the communications person from Regis was very upfront. He said, "Look, I already promised this story to the Wall Street Journal. I can't go back on my word. You understand where I'm coming from. I understand where you're coming from, but I want to see you do something on this. How can we, let's talk. What can we do?" And so he presented to me Joe Manfredi, who was one of 3 1,000-point scorers at Regis at the time, how he's from Staten Island and he's wearing Tony Fauci's number. Was there a connection there? And so I talked to the Manfredis, who couldn't be, nicer. I talked to the coaches there, who obviously know all the coaches from Xavier, and were giving me some ribbing. One thing leads to another. I'm talking to Peter Anderer, who was a good player at Regis, went on to play at Davidson. And there were just so many connections there. It morphed from this, hey, the infectious disease expert of America played point guard in high school, to, hey, infectious disease expert from America used to be a guy who used to take 3 trains a day and commute an hour and a half each way to get to school, to have the chance at this education, to have a chance to play basketball, to have a chance to create a better life for himself. And it's the same story that Joe Manfredi from Staten Island, that the latest 1,000-point scorer at Regis is experiencing. It's the same story that me and you had at Xavier, albeit on a small, at least for me, a smaller level, because I didn't have to commute that far. I was in Manhattan, but it's the same story that so many of our brothers at Xavier went through and continue to go through every single day. And it really morphed into this human interest piece that I think anyone in New York, particularly the Catholic school system in New York, was able to relate to. Colin Jost, who obviously went to Regis, the SNL Weekend Update host, anchor, he came out with a memoir shortly after my story published. And I read an excerpt from it about his commute from Staten Island to Regis every day. And I thought, holy crap, I should have called him up if I could, right? Like, it's the exact same thing. You have so many different people, so many successful people from different fields that all, I don't want to say came from nothing, because at least speaking personally, I had a pretty privileged upbringing, but came from pretty humble beginnings in startups, if you will, to get to where they needed to get to, and to have the success they had. And I just think the commonalities there, no matter what you're doing in life, principles, the trains, the commutes, you name it, there's definitely a common thread there. And I think that resonated with a lot of people.
Infectious disease expert used to play basketball, but it turned into a human interest piece. And when you said the word human interest piece, it got me thinking, like, wow, that's exactly what it was. It went so much further than the original point of the story. And that's I would imagine what you want out of any piece you do.
Absolutely. Kevin Brennan, by the way, is the communications chief for Regis. Be sure to shout him out, because he was such a big help and was everything you hope that a communications person can be. Yes, I mean, personally, from a personal rewarding standpoint, human interest is what I go for. I think it's really hard, not impossible, but really hard, I think, to make a whole career out of that, especially in this climate right now. And look, I love sports as much as the next guy, going to games, at least in non-COVID times, and interviewing big time athletes and coaches. That's what I get up every morning looking forward to doing, and telling their stories. And I love doing that. But getting the chance to do pieces like that, especially at a time like this in our country, was special. It was rewarding. It had a lot of personal resonance for me, because there was definitely some personal relatability there. And again, I was overwhelmed by the response from so many people. And I don't say that to brag about myself or anything like that. I wrote that story because it was neat. It was interesting. I wasn't sure if there would be an audience for that. I kind of took a leap of faith there and just made it my own kind of personal pet project, if you will. And the audience was great. The response was great. And I just think it was a really cool, neat way that all came together.
You got a really strong audience for it here back in the city. Obviously, you've been doing a lot of college football stuff in the last few years. When you started off, I noticed there was a stint with the Yankees, and you've obviously always had a passion for basketball, even going back to high school. How did you end up settling on football, and really, whether it was at ESPN or with the Athletic, really coming into your own and settling in with the sport of football?
It wasn't necessarily by design. I think going to a college football school, so to speak, like Penn State, that piqued my interest. I mean, I always loved the sport, but New York is not a hotbed for college football, as we all know, right? College basketball more so probably then than it is now due to the talent drain in the city. But I would skip school to go to the Big East tournament for some of those day sessions. I mean, I was obsessed with college basketball. I would watch college football, but I didn't grow up on it the way so many people entrenched in that sport did. Part of that was why I wanted to go to Penn State, right? I had gone to Catholic school my whole life. Not saying this just because I'm on this podcast. 4 most educational years of my life were the Jesuit education I got at Xavier High School. I really believe that. I've always had more of a personal connection there than I did Penn State, and that's nothing against Penn State. I had a great time there, but for whatever reason, I just had an easier time staying in touch and connected to that place than I have in college. But I wanted to try something different for college. I mean, I was very close to going to Loyola, Maryland, where a number of my friends, and I think probably still to this day, a lot of people from Xavier go to, because it's another great Jesuit school that's, in the region. And I remember thinking to myself, you know what, wherever I go, when I'm in college, I'm going to be waking up Saturday morning watching College Game Day and watching college football. And I don't want to sit there on the TV saying, I wish I could be there now. And I wonder what that's like. And I wonder what it's like to maybe get a chance to write about that, if that's what I want to do for a living. So ultimately, I went with Penn State. They had a strong communication school, and that's what I ended up choosing to do. And it was a great decision. I mean, it paid off for me greatly, personally, professionally. Yeah, I got out of there just in time. It's probably another podcast for another day about what happened there after I graduated, but I ended up covering a Big Ten football team and basketball team, which, was actually pretty good when I was there. They made March Madness. Their last NCAA tournament berth was my senior year there. So I was able to get opportunities at a high level, both college football and college basketball. And it just kind of worked out that way for me, college football wise. ESPN.com had reached out to me in the spring of my senior year, again, through a connection I had made with a beat writer covering Michigan, Michael Rossi, who now covers Alliance for ESPN.com. We hit it off when Michigan was playing Penn State. We just got to know each other, and they were hiring Michael to cover Michigan for ESPN.com. They were expanding their college coverages. It was very small at the time, and they wanted to get to more of a beat team by team approach. And they asked Michael for young, AKA cheap talent. And again, I was young, energetic, naive, obviously privileged because I was in college and I would have done this job for free, but I genuinely say that, like, I would have done anything for any kind of opportunity, let alone one at the worldwide leader. And so they reached out to me late in my senior year and said, let's keep in touch, yada, yada, yada. At that point, I had already lined up an internship at MLB.com covering the Yankees, which was also a dream couple months for me. Again, not paying rent, right? Got to live with my dad in the city and go up to the Bronx every day like I would in a normal summer for fun when I was paying it and going and buying a ticket. But I was not married to college football. I was ready, willing, and able to do whatever I was called upon to do. But because the bulk of my experience came at Penn State, that's where I was most marketable and familiar, so to speak. And one thing led to another. I got hired to cover Notre Dame for ESPN. And I've been in the Midwest ever since in my professional life. I'm in Chicago now, still doing a lot of Notre Dame, but doing general college football and a few other things here and there for the Athletic. And that's just kind of the way it played out. I love the sport. It's awesome. But it's kind of funny. If you told me in high school I'd be covering sports for a living, I'd say, that's awesome. Things, worked out exactly how I drew them up. If you told me I'd be covering college football, I probably would have scratched my head a little bit, just because I did not grow up I'd never been to a college football game, right, until my freshman year, Penn State, Florida International, which was coached by a man named Mario Cristobal, who's now the coach at Oregon, who's had a nice career for himself as well. It's just kind of funny how that played out. And I like to think I'm still young. I just turned 32. I want to cover as many things as possible, and I want college football to be as strong a part of that as possible. But maybe one day I can cover the NBA or MLB or NFL or do everything general, which, in some ways I get a chance to do now, which is why I love working at the Athletic. I get a chance to write about Dr. Fauci's high school basketball career, which again is a story that you never would dream of writing on the surface, but turned out to be a really fun experience.
That's so great. I mean, obviously, it's the Athletic affording the opportunity to stick your hand in whatever story you want to choose, as opposed to whatever the network might tell you that, okay, you have to only strictly talk about college football. You have the liberty to do what you want to do. What was that transition like then, going from ESPN to the Athletic and being a part of the Athletic family?
Yeah, there was about a 6 month gap in between there. I left ESPN at the end of 2016, freelance for a little bit, and I really enjoyed the freelance life. I mean, I know in some ways we're our own bosses, and that, especially right now, we're all working from home and kind of in charge of our own schedules. But then I was really my own boss. I mean, I networked, I marketed myself, I went out there, I did as many things as humanly possible to position myself for an opening if one were to come up, especially in the Chicago area where I was living at the time and still am now. But there were 6 months there of freelance work, and I think I learned a lot about myself then, because it validated my belief in this business, even when things were going poorly. I mean, we saw so many layoffs at that point. We're talking winter, spring of 2017 now, ESPN, Fox, Yahoo, Sports Illustrated, you name it. So many of my colleagues, as well as me, were getting laid off left and right. And it was like, what are we going to do here? And so I just kept grinding. I covered a lot of baseball. I covered a lot of spring football. And then Stuart Mandel, who was part of the Fox layoffs at the time, called me up. It's actually, I should backtrack here, not to make a short story long, but I remember we had just gotten back, my wife and I, from a trip to Cape Cod. And I had just gotten turned down for a full-time opening somewhere that I thought I was going to get. And so, I was kind of, it is what it is. The Associated Press had just offered me a freelance season-long gig to cover Notre Dame football. I thought, you know what, I'll give it the rest of the calendar year. I'll cover college football this year for the Associated Press, save up that money. And if nothing else comes up, might need to start looking at some other careers here, because the market is completely dry right now. And as much as I love being my own boss, this probably isn't a sustainable long-term future. And the day I get back from Cape Cod, I get a call from Stuart Mandel, who had just gotten let go at Fox and who now is the editor-in-chief of the college football vertical at The Athletic. He said, Matt, what do you know about The Athletic? And funny enough, The Athletic's first website was in Chicago. They had hired a number of people who had just gotten laid off at ESPN Chicago, some of whom I had worked with because I got laid off at the same time working for ESPN college football. And I said, I love it. I already subscribed. I know these guys. I see them at the Cubs games, whenever I go there. I know a lot about it, but, what are you doing with them? Because all I know them right now is I know them for being a Chicago site. It's like, well, they asked me to help launch the college football vertical, and I need to recruit writers. Like, would you be interested? Absolutely, I'd be interested. Are you kidding me? Like, I'll take any job right now, let alone one working for someone I know and working for a website that, although in its infancy, I'd come to really admire and respect from afar. And even then, at that point, as thrilled as I was to be part of the ground level, if you will, the college football vertical of The Athletic. I mean, to give you a picture, we had 8 full-time writers and editors when we launched in August of 2017, and 3 years later, probably close to 60, and that's just in college football. I never in a million years would have thought it would grow this fast, this great, and become this, I like to call it the daily Sports Illustrated. We all loved Sports Illustrated growing up, waiting every Wednesday for that to land in our mailbox and read great writing. Now you get that every day at The Athletic, and to be part of that and to get to be a part of that at such an early stage of the company's existence was an absolute thrill. I never could have predicted all this success for this company coming this quick, but I definitely believed in their vision, and I believed in the people behind it. And I've been very, very fortunate to be in position to have some of the opportunities I've had. It's been really awesome, especially seeing us grow during a pandemic. Like, that's unheard of. It's been really special. And I think, being with these people during the dark times of this country, so to speak, has only validated why I love working here so much.
Like you mentioned with the pandemic, of course, the opportunities you were afforded for the last few years have been fantastic, but this presented a new opportunity to grow in terms of how you're going to be different and be able to respond to a pandemic. Outside of the normal challenges of maybe conducting interviews on Zoom and things like that, were there any other obstacles that you feel like the pandemic kind of brought up that The Athletic or yourself did a great job of kind of navigating and getting better from?
Yeah, we've done, I got to credit our leadership, our co-founders, Alex Mather and Adam Hansman. They're great communicators. They're very hands-on bosses. They're very approachable, which you don't always get. You rarely get, no matter where you're working. And believe me, I was a lot more scared of Coach McGrain than I am of these guys. And I say that with all due respect to these guys. They're great guys to work for. The communication, the approachability, friendly reminders about how they're here for us and how, like, we need to give ourselves mental breaks, especially since we're not seeing each other we could check in on each other as much as we want via Zoom and phone calls, but we don't really know how everyone's handling everything. And some people are obviously dealing with this on a much more personal and physical level, frankly, from a health standpoint than others. I mean, my concerns and my needs over the last year have probably been no different than most people, but I've had it pretty good. I mean, my wife, myself, my kid, we're all healthy. We're working from home. I mean, that's our challenge, right? Buying another desk so that we can both work from. I always work from home. I've welcomed in a new coworker, if you will, with my wife, who's learning how to work from home now because she was used to working 9 to 5 in an office every day. Dealing with childcare needs and things of that nature has been different and has been a challenge, but something I'm happy to navigate because I love the people I'm living with and I love the people that I'm working with. As far as my day-to-day job, the thing I love about the Athletic more than anything else is that it affords us the opportunities to tell good stories. And by that, I mean, they give us the tools and resources and trust necessary to go out and do those stories. And for me, that's having free reign, so to speak, to go to certain parts of the country, no matter how near or far, to get to meet people, to get to learn about their stories and help them tell their stories, and to make as many connections as humanly possible. And without that human element, that's lacking. I miss going to games and seeing people. In some ways, I'm doing more than I've ever done before because I can get on press conferences in Evanston, Illinois, South Bend, Indiana, and Los Angeles, California after this and knock them all out like that and get all the actual daily information I need. But so is everyone else, right? I don't get a chance to really distinguish myself or to get out there and get some time alone with a coach or player or PR person who I need to build a relationship with. So I still think, at its heart is digital. As much as social media has come to dominate this field, at its heart, it's still a people business. It's relationship business. And I'm looking forward to the day the world has order restored, for lack of a better term, so that we can get back to connecting the way that we really like to connect human to human.
Hopefully that day comes soon in a hopefully vaccinated world. On that same note, how do you think the entire landscape of print and media journalism is going to shape out at the end of all this? Whether it's trends, patterns, if there's any analytics for it that you kind of think that have exposed parts of the industry that used to not work that now we've kind of gotten better at?
We all got to become more tech savvy. And I'm the most guilty person in the world of that. Like, I think I'm good enough at social media, but I know how to do it. I know what not to do, but I'm by no means an innovator. Anytime I see something new or, someone posts something, a cool graphic, whatever, I'm kind of like, oh, how'd you do that? That's one place I definitely need to grow. And I think that's a place that's going to be even more emphasized, given that we're in this disconnected state, if you will. I'll be curious to see once most of the country is able to get vaccinated. A lot of these schools, particularly at the college level, were very closed off and limited in how much they let their coaches and players speak and deal with the media. Are they going to use the pandemic as an excuse to completely shield us off? Because again, I was able to get who I needed on Zoom here, but I'd be on a call with 20 other people. I was not able to pull a coach aside, give him my business card and say, hey, let's get to know each other. I mean, look, I've had some in-depth and I think successful interviews with players one-on-one via Zoom. But for someone like me who really tries to peel back as many layers as possible when telling someone's personal story, there's still that loss of human touch of sitting in the room and observing them and them observing me and being able to feel me and trust me and so forth. I've got to be better at trying to do that on Zoom. And I think we all need to be better at trying to do that on Zoom because I don't think Zoom's going away anywhere. I think if there's a positive, we've learned how productive we can be with very limited resources here because we're all playing from the same playbook, so to speak. So there have been some positives that come out of it. I just hope that the human connection, human touch, the human element of what we do does not get completely shattered away because we've all learned how to be much more efficient doing things in the world of Zoom.
Beautiful stuff. And I mean, this was awesome. Matt, thank you so much for coming on. The way you've gone in depth on all these questions, I've just learned so much about both, whether it's the industry or, of course, I mean, reflecting on your time at Xavier and the parallels I pull to it from my experience there. And I can't wait to see both what you do in the future and I can't wait to talk again soon.
Absolutely. No, thanks so much for having me, John. It's been a pleasure. I love your background. I don't know if our listeners can see it, but we got Magic Johnson, Kristaps Porzingis, Giannis Antetokounmpo, and Xavier High School jerseys. I love to see it. It's awesome. One of those isn't like the other. And for that, I'll say Porzingis in the Knicks because they're not really good and he doesn't play for them anymore. So I'll put Xavier ahead of the New York Knicks right now as far as the basketball pecking order in the tri-state area.
I wouldn't be fast to disagree with you on that one.
Thanks Thanks for listening to Gen Z Hoops. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe on Instagram, LinkedIn, and all major social media platforms at Gen Z Hoops. You can tune in and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, and every other podcast platform on the planet. Get ready for the next episode.